Hello and welcome to the final day of York Festival of Ideas. My name is Anna Phoebe, and for the next hour we are going to be going between worlds, exploring space and sound. So I've got four incredible guests lined up, and their expertise and experience range right across all disciplines from space, science, art, music, poetry. I'd like to introduce my first guest. His name is Professor Mark McCaughrean, and he is the Senior Advisor for Science and Exploration at the European Space Agency. Mark, thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure, Anna. Good to see you as always.
And I guess the first thing we have to clear up is what exactly does a Senior Advisor of Science and Exploration do?
That's a good question. And after months and months of sitting in my shed, I've almost forgotten. No. So I basically two roles. One role is to advise the two directors at the European Space Agency I work for, the Director of Science and the Director of Human and Robotic Exploration. So this encompasses all of the missions staring at the universe, looking at the planets and other objects in our solar system, and actually sending humans to some of these places. And that's sort of internal and involves looking at the science and advising them on that. But the big other part, effectively, is talking to the outside community, to the public that pay for everything that we do. And I'm particularly interested in talking to different audiences, not just the people who are already interested in space and science, but all of the communities that come close to us and then use their audiences to go further beyond that.
And as someone who pivots between those roles, looking sort of inward at the science community and then looking outward at people like myself, where would you say this human fascination for space and space exploration, where does that come from?
I think ultimately everybody finds their own particular interest. Some people are really interested in rockets being launched. Some people are interested in humans going into space and effectively being our avatars. And not all of us can go, but others can, and they can relate those experiences when they come back. But you can find that in robots as well. You can send a robot to a distant world and have that explore, and effectively that's your eyes for looking at those other parts of the universe. But for me personally, I think it's more a reflective thing looking back, because I think often we find that we lack perspective in life. It tends to be about ourselves. It tends to be about our near friends and family for obvious reasons. That's the way that we've evolved. But I think sometimes that can take over from wider empathy and wider understanding about what it means to be human, and also what it means to be an insignificant piece of recycled stardust. And for me, at least, philosophically, that's what motivates me the most, is to try to, in the brief time we have on this planet, in this enormous universe that will last much longer than any of us, find some perspective.
I think there's one story you told me before in the past about Cosmic Vertigo. It kind of reminded me of this tapping into like a universal consciousness. And I guess through music, you would have the same kind of feeling, like those moments when you're on stage and everything sort of fits into the present moment, but then you also become suddenly very aware, almost panic attack aware, that it feels like time sort of stands still and you kind of see how small you are fitting into like the greater mass of things. And can you just explain that concept of cosmic vertigo and the experience that you had?
It's our job to work on incredibly large scales, looking across the universe, very low temperatures, very high speeds, all of the things which often become kind of the focus in outreach. This object's moving millions of kilometers an hour. This is billions of kilometers away. But of course, in order to do that for a living, you have to blank that out. You can't actually deal with that day to day. It's just numbers on a page. But occasionally, it can strike you. And I think the example we discussed was, I was just driving to work last year. I had a bike crash, and normally I cycle to work and I'm kind of in the zone, but in the car I can have the radio on. And I was listening to classical music on the classical channel here in the Netherlands. And all of a sudden, there was this crazy idea and reality that all I was doing was tapping into these radio waves, which were completely filling the sky and the space and the trees and the grass around me. They were all there, and I had a little device plugged in my car, which was able to turn that from electromagnetic waves into sound waves going into my head. So I turned the radio off. I couldn't hear the music anymore, but I looked out of the window, and it was still there. Sibelius or Rachmaninoff or whoever it was still in the space around me because the radio station was still broadcasting. And for that sort of 1 kilometer, that sense of sort of falling into the universe, that sense of vertigo, you suddenly could appreciate all of the additional messages and signals around us that we can't tap into all the time because it would overwhelm our brains. And then a kilometer later, it was gone. But, you know, I kind of lived for those moments, suddenly appreciating something about this incredibly bizarre world that we live in, surrounding us all the time.
And would you say that scientific creativity is a search for understanding those moments, or is it motivated by the search for the unknown or for understanding not only our condition but also what's out there? Where would you say scientific creativity comes from?
Well, again, I think, you know, some people will find a niche in effectively solving equations and making something beautiful fall out of a jumble of ideas that can be codified. It can almost be kind of a knitting thing where, you know, if you follow a pattern in the right way, something may come out of it which is, you know, bigger than the sum of the parts of you clacking needles together. But others will try to engage, as it were, with those big ideas and those big concepts and that sense of distance and that sense of smallness. And for me, I'm an observer. There are theoreticians who will work with equations. I'm somebody who likes to go to a telescope, point a new instrument at the sky, look somewhere, normally somewhere where you think something might be, but it has happened to me in the past. I've pointed accidentally in the wrong place. I'd suddenly discovered something, suddenly seen something mediated through the telescope, the electronics, the cameras, the screen, yes, but suddenly I've seen something that I know absolutely no human being has ever seen before. And that intense rush of adrenaline that occurs at that moment of discovery, I wouldn't say it's why I got into it, but I can say at this point it is slightly addictive. It doesn't happen very often. None of us are that lucky, but when it does happen, you remember it. You remember it for a long time.
And do you think, I'm not, obviously as a musician, I'm sort of taking intangible things which exist, like your car Sibelius moment. I mean, all these frequencies are floating in the air and you're kind of grasping onto them and you're kind of, through your craft or your telescope or your written note, you're making something tangible out of something which kind of already exists but hasn't been heard or seen in that way before. I'm just wondering what you think of, I mean, there's so many artist response or sci-fi, literature, film, the idea of artists responding to space, science, technology, is it of any value? And is it just to communicate outwards, or does it have any impact going back to the scientists?
In my experience, it can have profound impact coming back the other way. I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, we don't necessarily, when we make a discovery, it is a responsibility to share that. It's a responsibility to put that out there, partly because of the joy of sharing it, but also because the public has paid for everything that we've done. And that's a responsibility. You just can't go off, you know, spending public money without giving something back. But in our experience in the last few years, it's definitely been the case that when we've invited artists in who are inspired by or touched by or can spark off the things that we can show them or the things we can describe, I've seen scientists turn from being, you know, pretty straight down the line. This is my job. You know, I push the buttons. I do this. I do that. They're suddenly exposed to a whole new realm of creativity. And we've had it with artists in residence working with us at the European Space Agency, who at the beginning, the scientists are a bit reticent. It's like, well, why am I doing that? That's not my job. My job is to, you know, make spreadsheets and push buttons and make spacecraft move around. And at the end of the experience, they've suddenly been opened up to things which can influence how they see their job and maybe will influence the sorts of things they go on to do. Or let's observe over here, because that might bring something together with something over there. It makes connections, and those connections are incredibly valuable.
Well, I think curiosity, connecting, and then it just changes your perspective. My experience of coming to visit you at ESTEC in the Netherlands, at first, when I was given this sort of 10-minute remit to write some music for Space Rocks, I probably, like a lot of others, just thought, well, European Space Agency, it's all about out there. I'm gonna write music of the spheres and kind of join that sort of celestial sound. And it was really spending that day with you at ESTEC totally changed my viewpoint of what science and space technology and European Space Agency is all about. And I went from looking out, like you said before, it was all about looking in. there's so many stories that you could tell, but I really want you to share the one about sending Vangelis and Hawking's voice into the black hole.
A number of years ago, we started working with famous synthesizer, keyboard composer, soundtrack artist Vangelis. He's very interested in space. He's written about space, and he hooked up with one of our astronauts, Andrei Kuipers, on the space station when he was there. Andrei said, I want to talk to Vangelis, and one of my colleagues, Carl, said, well, that's going to be difficult, but it worked and it happened. And so Vangelis has written various pieces of music linked to our missions. Famously, he wrote an album linked to the Rosetta comet mission. But indeed, a couple of years ago, when Stephen Hawking passed away, Vangelis wrote a piece of music and used Stephen's voice, a very emotional piece about preserving the Earth, not only looking outwards, but finding that perspective. So Vangelis contacted us and said, could we send the music into space? We had done this before, and of course, there's always this slight question. Some people say, is this dangerous? Could you actually wake up aliens, and will they come and invade us if you beam signals into space? Because that's nonsense, because we're constantly beaming out signals into space to communicate with our spacecraft. So if we're ever going to wake aliens up, we've done it. And we talked to Lucy Hawking, who's the daughter of Stephen, and tried to make, what are we really trying to achieve here? We really, really didn't want it to be a PR stunt, because, that's not respectful. Because this was actually done at the moment where Stephen's remains were interred into Westminster Abbey between Newton and Darwin. So one of our antennas is in Spain, and I had figured that was available at the time when the interment was taking place. Vangelis' initial idea was just sort of beam it into space as a symbolic gesture. And I thought, well, let's actually try to be a bit more specific. Let's send it somewhere which is linked to Hawking. And of course, he's famously involved in black hole research as a theorist. And during his lifetime, we've discovered many black holes. And so indeed, in my black book catalogue, I thought, well, which one is available overhead at the moment of the interment? And it turned out, fortunately, that it's the nearest black hole to Earth that was available. And that's kind of symbolic. You send the signal out in that direction. And it also had that sort of slight twist to it, which of course is not true, that by sending it into a black hole, that the signal was going to disappear and not come out, and therefore not wake the aliens up. It's not really what happens. It just most of it just goes straight past the black hole. But what was fascinating was that even though we were trying to be low key and respectful, it really captured the imagination, and there was a huge amount of press from the newspapers, but also Rolling Stone and Variety and others. So I think that sci-art connection, that a sense that we had the technology to do it, but also in a way that we were willing to take the imaginative leap and work with a musician on behalf of a famous scientist. I take very little credit for it, because it's really Vangelis' idea, but it's symbolic of many of the things that we have done, where we've tried to work with people like you, many other musicians, but also writers, filmmakers, and others, to try to find those creative connections, not as a branding exercise, absolutely not as a branding exercise, but that other people will recognize that creativity and find something themselves to spark from. Collaborations,
successful ones, should do. And that's why I think I love that story, because you're telling the story of Hawking. The platform is this the technology that ESA provides, but also the music is also the way in which you're going to communicate it. But it all kind of ties together where those worlds can kind of meet and tell a good story and tell the narrative.
One of the great revelations of the space age has been the perspective it has given humanity on ourselves. When we see the Earth from space, we see ourselves as a whole. We see the unity, and not the divisions. It is such a simple image, with a compelling message: one planet, one human race. We are here together, and we need to live together with tolerance and respect.
I think we've run out of time, but I think we're going to bring you back later to chat to Lauren Bowker about dark matter and visualizing dark matter in the arts. So if you'd like to stick around and join.
I would love to do that, and I'll turn my screen completely black and I'll be invisible. That's what to symbolize the dark matter. But I'll see you with Lauren in a little bit.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mark. My next guest is an extraordinary woman. She calls herself an alchemist, which I think is just totally fascinating. She's a material alchemist. She combines technology, science, and art. And she's presented at the UN. She's done a bunch of TED Talks. So I really want to welcome Lauren Bowker. Lauren, hi.
Hey, nice to see you.
Nice to see you. First of all, material alchemist. What does that mean? Who are you and what do you do?
Yeah. So I'm the founder of The Unseen, and The Unseen really is just what I like to think of an exploration journey to visualize what the world can't see for itself. But alchemist really came from two ways. I think to me, an alchemist is just somebody who is curious and wants to see more to the world than what they're shown and sort of what their normal senses are perceiving. So just that idea of curiosity and using what you're good at to go out and explore things that you perhaps can't understand, can't see, and can't sense. And my background's in chemistry, and then I went on to do design as my master's. And on my master's degree, I always had like loads of pots brewing of things I was trying to sense and like random concoctions just all around me. And then I just kind of got nicknamed, the alchemist. And then I was like, maybe I am an alchemist, because it's that combination and collaboration of both all different disciplines to essentially try and discover something. Material alchemist for me is just that. It's just the combination of science, design, and art through materials to visualize and be curious and go out and explore.
And with your background with both chemistry and art, would you say that the way that you approach ideas or the way that you approach your creative process, does the art come first or does the science come first? And then what is the relationship between them as you go along to get to your final product? Yeah,
I think, to be honest, actually, for me, it's the curiosity comes first. So I'm always like, I'll start thinking about something or I'll see something and I'll be like, what's that? And I'll get obsessed about like something that I can't understand as a human, and often something that my senses won't let me understand. So maybe it's something that I know exists, but that's invisible, or something that I know is there, but you can't smell it or taste it or see it or touch it. And that to me is where it starts. So, for example, like dark matter, I'm like, what is dark matter? I'm really obsessed by it, but we can't tangibly see it. We can see the effects of it, but we can't see it. So I'm like, well, how can I analyze that? How can I like understand that to be able to comprehend it as a person just in this world, and how can I see into those other worlds and those other dimensions? And the way that I do that is kind of to like try and break it down. So I'm like, okay, well, what's it made out of? What's the science? And then how can I use that science to like interpret it and understand it more? And then once I understood it and made it something tangible and physical, then what can I do with that physical thing to express it to other people? So once I've taken it in, how can I like talk and show people what it is that I have, found out there in the unseen, whether it's in a different dimension, whether it's in our world, whether it's in other worlds. And I think that was where the curiosity with science came about, was the idea of like, what is it made out of? How can we break it down to the smallest possible component or molecule and then rebuild it and understand it in a different way? And allow it to do something that perhaps nature didn't intend it to do. That
beautiful colour changing, and was it with Swarovski as well? I mean, just absolutely, they look like works of art. I mean, the science that would have gone and the technology that would have gone into making a piece as beautiful as that.
Yeah, we have an amazing group. So it's not just me, I founded it, but I could never have done the things that I've done without a whole team. And the team is built up of strategists, of chemists, bioengineers, physicists, electronic engineers, all sorts of different curious people that have this desire to manipulate materials and explore the world that they live in and beyond, and create things for purpose, and things that perhaps reveal to us data streams or things that as human beings we can't see or feel or touch or sense ourselves. And I think the project that you were mentioning, the sort of wings piece, came about from a scientific project in research that we did for Formula One to look at aerodynamics on a car. But then, because that was so beautiful, seeing a car change color in a wind tunnel in real life, I wanted to then see how like the human aerodynamic was, and wanted to craft something that worked from an ergonomic point of view. So like every little fin was handcrafted, hand cut, and is a certain thickness to really cut through the wind. And then the formula is then custom made for those individual pieces, so that it creates like turbulence at the same time too. So you see that turbulence on the garment as you kind of come across the shoulder and you get this aerodynamic trip around you. I just really wanted to visualize this, and it sort of goes like these kind of wings behind your back, and then the piece just ended up looking like that, because that ergonomically from a design point of view is what trips the wind best, so you get the best colors. So I think as an observer to the piece, you don't have to understand the science, you don't have to understand all the philosophy or work that went into it, but you can just appreciate something in front of you that's changing color when you move around in it, and it might make you think slightly differently, or open your eyes a little bit more, or perhaps pique curiosity of what is going on that we aren't just shown straight in front of us.
Well, I think what I really love about your work as well is that you're not only uncovering unseen worlds, you're also using the technology and the science and the beauty of the art that you're creating to also highlight things like climate change.
Yeah, so actually when I was my first sort of project in chemistry years ago, sort of 10, maybe like 12 years ago now, I made a compound that changes color to carbon emission. So it essentially goes from like yellow to black depending on how much carbon emission you've absorbed each day. And that was just during my undergrad project, and I was really interested in visualizing, actually at the time, cigarette smoke. So I was like, how can you create products that show people have smoked, and then perhaps for younger people that would stop them wanting to smoke, because you would see the visual impact that it was having on your body. And then I went one step further and was like, well, how can we visualize bigger pollution, not just cigarette pollution? And then all of a sudden I made this jacket that goes from like yellow to black in real time, depending on how much carbon emission you literally interact with. I had this like moment where I was like, if I tell you your carbon footprint and give you a book of facts and figures, you're going to feel really bad for a day, but it might not make you want to change your physical impact from a daily life. But if I put you in this jacket and put you behind a bus, and then that changes color right in front of your eyes, then you're going to create like an emotional connection to it. And then that's much more likely to make you want to change your footprint as you go forward. So then I just had this moment where I was like, color is such an easy way to translate really complex data that's hard, that's bigger than us, that's hard for us to get our heads around. Like, we see climate change every day, but we don't necessarily recognize it. So I wanted to sort of bring together my skills that were in chemistry and in design to try and use both of those sort of smart intelligent materials together to create a new language, which then was simplified at Somerset House again by bringing it into a Union Jack. So everyone sort of knows the Union Jack. They know that it's supposed to be red, white and blue. And then we put it on top of Somerset House in Strand, which is the most polluted street in Europe, for 6 months, and tracked it daily. And the flag changed its colour depending on how much carbon emission was in the atmosphere of Strand, which is sort of a representation of London's atmosphere. And yeah, the dream of that project was that then we can take these flags, whatever country, whatever language, and really start to visualize the real-time pollution that's going on out there. And people who don't, again, know the science, they could just see a black Union Jack one day and a colourful one the next, and then just, maybe they'll start to ask the question, well, why is that flag changing? And then maybe they'll read a little bit deeper into that project and why it's there. So
you're providing a platform for people to have an emotional connection with something that they don't necessarily understand. With your t-shirts, like, that's kind of a similar, tell me about that. Was that with the UN, or you presented it to the UN?
Yes, that was with the UN and the Lost Explorer, and another really cool brand that's very founded around nature and very much champions the idea of getting back into nature and trying to encourage, children at a young age to be interested in chemistry, but also be interested in nature, and don't just sit there and Google a tree and then draw it. Go out and see a tree and then draw it, or go and jump in a pond, for example. There's not a lot of people will do that. As many people will do that these days as when we were children. There's far too much digital interaction going on, I would say. But we wanted to create a lot of what I do, because it extends in colour change. I'm forever getting asked at places like, oh, is it just global hypercolor? Like, you remember those t-shirts in the 80s that you breathed on and they just changed color? And I'm always like, well, the principles of the chemistry in some ways is the same, but no, it's like much more smart and much more intelligent version of that, hopefully. But I thought, well, look, if we're going to create like a global hypercolor for today's generation, then what would that look like? And these t-shirts that I wanted to make the recipe open source, so it's super easy kitchen chemistry with a cabbage, like a red cabbage. You just boil up the red cabbage, dye whatever fabric you want to put into the solution, and then that fabric then will change color when it comes into contact with water, dependent on the different pH scale of the water. So it'll go, for example, if you jumped in the Dead Sea, which is really alkaline, it would go more yellow, whereas if you jumped in a volcanic spring, which I'm not recommending you do, but it would go more acidic. Whereas if you go up to the ice caps or the polar north, then you're getting something that's much more neutral. Whereas London is much more, as you can imagine, quite grimy, and you get more of the green colours. So it's just a really fun project that I hoped would connect children back both to nature, but also give them that curiosity to start to explore the materials around them and see what's happening, and see that that water is not the same as that water because we've done something to it.
So before lockdown happened, you were due to go visit CERN, weren't you? And unfortunately that got obviously postponed. But I know we can't bring you there, but we do have Mark McCaughrean, and I know you have some questions. So I was wondering if we can bring Mark back into the conversation. And I think your next explorations, I think you're talking about looking at dark matter, visualizing dark matter. And as if by magic, there he is, Mark. Mark meet Lauren, Lauren meet Mark. I think Mark, you're probably the most qualified person in the room to answer Lauren's questions.
So just before lockdown, I was just about to visit CERN to I'm obsessed with dark matter, dark energy, and the idea of uncovering stuff that we have not yet uncovered as humans or in our world and our dimension. And the reason I sort of called my company The Unseen, or my collective The Unseen, was because I genuinely am just curious about unseen stuff. So anything that you can't see, smell, hear, taste, like for me, that's like the holy grail of trying to find it, and naturally have fallen into dark matter and dark energy. I'm
intrigued by your interest in the dark matter and the dark energy. In a sense, of course, they're two completely separate things, and it's a bit of a labeling problem from the astronomy community that we've given them the dark label. We don't think that they're the same in any sense at all. One of them might just be a term in an equation, nothing more than that. So there's almost nothing to look for. That's dark energy. But dark matter is a fascinating one. And we're currently building a big telescope, space telescope called Euclid, which is designed explicitly to go out into space and not to see dark matter, because you can't, that's the definition of it, but to see its influence on things that you can see.
Yeah.
And again, that comes right back to your work, right? It's
how do you take that influence and then manifest it into something that then somebody can understand? You know, like I think the dropping of the apple for gravity is a great explanation of it. Like, you know, everything falls down and sticks, so there's something bringing it down, but you can't see it. So I find it just so inspiring, and I'm really excited to get out and learn more about it. But it's definitely my area.
One of the two directors I work for is actually working currently on the idea, observationally, but also working with theoreticians, that the dark matter might be leftover small black holes, not pinpricks, but kind of the massive stars, which were made at the time of the Big Bang. And which are still left in the universe today. And, maybe there's one hovering out near the edge of our solar system. They can't be uncommon, because we see the influence of dark matter is substantial. We know whatever it is, there's lots of it. It's, in fact, much more than there is normal matter. So, if it's black holes, then that's our job to look for those. But we don't know. That's the whole point. We don't know if it's subatomic particles. We don't know if it's sort of macroscopic objects at the moment. And that's why it's such an interesting field.
I wish I'd have gone into work for space in some way, but it's funny how your lives pan out. But is that all criminal forensics is my other one. Anything that you can just recover stuff. And I think I'm just obsessed with breaking down things and understanding it and trying to analyze it to try and give meaning to the world, I guess, or give meaning to the purpose of life. So
that really is the basis, I think, of the discussion today, and why it's so good to work with people like you and with Anna and everybody else, is because it changes our perspective as scientists, because we get a little bit into our silo, and we figure everybody understands what we're doing, and if they don't, they're a bit stupid. No, I don't mean it in a patronizing way, but we need to be lifted out of that and sort of be confronted with new ways of looking at representation of even us, right? We're on Zoom. Our fingers, they're actually empty space, right? There's nothing there. There's a nucleus in the atoms. The atoms are incredibly widespread with the electrons out far distances. There's nothing there. But I can't push my finger through my finger. And that's not because it's not really what matter is. It's to do with electromagnetism, that I can't push my finger through my finger. What? You know, we're insubstantial in some weird way. And yet we don't think of ourselves that way.
Yeah, but those moments where you literally, and then you're like, but I when you start to look at what you're broken down out of, and you're like, but literally I can go down and down and down and down, and then you're like, but how? And then your mind just explodes.
Maybe we should all go for a drink when this is all over, because there's so much crossover.
I agree.
Yeah. Lauren, I just want to say massive thank you for joining us. I can't wait to see what the Unseen Collective gets up to next. And Mark, as always, it's such a pleasure to talk to you. And I feel like this is our shortest conversation. Even a 5-minute chat goes into an hour. And like all of them, this could have been so much longer. But thank you so much for your time, both of you.
My pleasure. Thank you
for having us.
My next guest is Nitin Sawhney. He is the winner and recipient of multiple awards, including the Ivor Novello Lifetime Achievement Award. He recently got a CBE. He's a producer, musician, composer. The list is honestly endless, and we don't have time to list everything. But I think the one thing that I've most heard you introduced as is a polymath. So Nitin, welcome.
Hi.
What is the significance of a polymath, or what does it mean to you?
Well, you're a polymath. I don't know. It's a weird one, isn't it? Because, I guess it's in a basic way, it's kind of somebody who does lots of things. But then again, the polymaths that I admired were everyone from Leonardo da Vinci to Rabindranath Tagore to Einstein to Marie Curie to Satyen Bush. I mean, there's so many people that I could talk about as polymaths that I consider polymaths. I'm certainly not amongst that lot. So it's kind of I guess also, interestingly, the greatest polymaths for me came out of either the Italian Renaissance or the Bengali Renaissance, in a way, you know. And so I kind of think those are the people I found kind of inspiring in that respect.
So when was, just because I'm not familiar, when was the Bengali Renaissance?
Started the late, I guess more the beginning of the 20th century, around that kind of time. But it included people like, I suppose the two most famous exponents of it were Rabindranath Tagore and Satyen Bush, who was the physicist who came up with the Bose-Einstein condensate with Einstein. But it's kind of interesting because they also had that kind of same interest in humanism that you had in the Italian Renaissance. So it's kind of, I love all of that because it's kind of, because there was a real movement of science and arts moving together. And I think it's kind of in a way, kind of more rationalist thinking. I suppose that also happened in the Italian Renaissance. So I guess what was the most amazing thing that emerged from all of that was when Albert Einstein actually met Rabindranath Tagore in Berlin in 1927, 1930, and they exchanged ideas, which I still think are some of the most amazing. It's one of the most amazing conversations for what it represented more than anything. It was posthumously re-edited, but it's an amazing conversation. So I don't know, polymaths, very complicated thing to talk about.
I know from working with you and in your music, the way that you use maths, even in terms of some of the Indian classical influences, how does that inform your creative process, and how much does it inform your music?
Well, I mean, it's interesting what you're saying, because, I mean, for example, if you go back to, I suppose, if you go to the 17th century, and if you think about Bach, you know, Bach was actually, you know, with the idea of fractals, with the idea of creating music that actually had mathematics behind it. You know, some of his phrases actually would do all kinds of clever mathematical things, and so if you look at even the fugues or the you know, less so the two-part inventions, but more the fugues, that happens anyway. But you're absolutely right, within Indian classical music, it's very much the case as well. I mean, I was just now talking to Anushka Shankar about all of that, and the idea of the fact that she can intuitively find the mathematics of music. So within, as you know, within Indian classical music, you have what are known as behides, and you'll have a pattern that's repeated 3 times that has to land in the first beat of a given cycle. So from that point of view, it can be really interesting, because it's about what it's about how you arrive at that one. So there are so many different ways in which you can use mathematics, because within Indian classical music, you have very complicated time signatures. Not, you know, generally within Western classical music or you know, jazz, it's mainly 4/4, 3/4, or 6/8. Most music is. Whereas if you look at Indian classical music, you'll have 17 beat cycles, 13 beat cycles, 10 beat cycles, and so on. So it's kind of this idea of the extended time cycle, and playing with that mathematically, rhythmically, is actually very much part of the intrinsic way in which Indian classical music works.
But you say that Anushka can do this intuitively, and to me that is a really odd concept. I can't imagine being intuitive about mathematics, and that's what I'm so interested in. Anyone's brain who can say that they can intuitively know when it's going to fall through a complicated pattern is going to fall on the one. Like, how is that intuition? Is that something you're either born with or not born with, or is that something that is years of training to a point where intuition then kicks in?
Well, that's really that's such a, I mean, for me, that's one of the most interesting questions. It's something I think about a lot, because, I mean, for example, if you took the great Indian mathematician Ramanujan, Srinivasa Ramanujan, who around the beginning of the 20th century, when in fact he came over, I think he might have come over at the beginning of the First World War to work with G. Hardy at Cambridge University. And he, I mean, one of the greatest mathematicians of all time, he could derive mathematical principles for proofs and formula from first principles. He didn't really need to build on all of the knowledge that so many other mathematicians had done. And sometimes you do find yourself kind of arriving at conclusions that come to you. And I guess this kind of gets into what we were talking about earlier on, that kind of idea that Freud talked about when he quoted Ramakrishna when he said that, you know, that there was like an oceanic feeling, but it was this idea there's a sea of consciousness, and that, you know, people like Ravi Shankar, for example, musicians, talked about the idea that you're a medium to manifest music, the rag, and that it's somehow intuitively, you know, you have that all around you, all of that consciousness, and you actually just manifest it somehow.
Well, but I mean, I'm totally intrigued by that, because I still have a mental block with thinking that the maths of patterns or numbers can translate into music in a way that I would be intuitive about it. But at the same time, you know, anyone who's been in a writing session, or you're playing notes, and you know when the physics of something is how it should be. First
of all, what you just talked about, that's really interesting, because you were saying you know when something's just right, and I know, having worked with you, that you obviously know as a violinist when something is in tune. But there's the idea of that in terms of how we perceive things, you know, and neurologically, and the music that it's made. I mean, if you look at Pythagoras, I mean, Pythagoras established the idea of ratios, integer ratios, in terms of musical intervals, and we can hear when there's a perfect fifth, or when there's an octave, or when there's a minor third. But actually, that's to do with our understanding neurologically of consonance and dissonance. So not just about being in tune, but if I choose a melody which is but then just even the approach to a note, it could be as nuanced and as fine tuning as you like, but it's just, especially in the studio where everything is magnified because you're just going on audio, it's that moment. Would you say that is that close to what you're describing?
when it comes
well,
to...
Yeah, 100%, because I think that's what you also said, was you said when it's kind of, it's the result is greater than the sum of its parts in a way. And it's kind of when you have, and that's actually what you read that piece in the New Scientist recently, where they were talking about universal consciousness. They were saying consciousness exists when you have a result that is greater than the sum of its parts. So you have a maximal idea of a number that they were actually attributing to it. But the whole point is that I think when you tap into consciousness, it's kind of something that you can feel. But now at the moment, and that's my point, is kind of from what I was just saying, is that people are actually trying to study that. I mean, previously they called it panpsychism or neurotheology. Neurotheology is about the idea that you're one with the universe, or studying that. And then you've got panpsychism, which is the idea that consciousness is a property of matter. But it's kind of like, in a way, we kind of are tapping into something that is kind of around us, or part of, I guess, the fabric of reality, or part of the fabric of the universe. And I think that music, for me, has always felt like a kind of an instrument that allows you to do that in some way.
I guess universal consciousness in the Western world, it's been kind of shoved into like a spiritualism corner. Do you think that in other cultures it's always been there and it's always been accepted?
Yeah, yes, I do feel that, but I think people have felt that for a long time. I think Beethoven, wrote some of his greatest work when he was totally deaf, and I think that's possibly, it's interesting, when he was 46 years old in 1816 that he started to quote from Hindu scripture. And it's the same with physicists. I mean, if you think about Schrödinger, he was really into Hinduism. There's a lot of this kind of Eastern mysticism that actually kind of became in vogue around, for a lot of the scientists of the last century, who were looking for answers about the nature of not just reality, but consciousness itself. And, Einstein talks about wanting to know the mind of God. And it's kind of this search is something that I think we feel as musicians as well. When you're composing or when you're improvising, in a way, I kind of think you're communing with the universe in a way that you don't necessarily understand on a conscious level, but subliminally we are connecting with. I mean, there's this concept of qualia, which is the idea of subjective human experience. So I may experience the smell of coffee differently to you, or the color red differently to you, and this is something again that Einstein and Tagore spoke about. The greatest.
Already. We've had arguments about red and orange already.
Yeah, quite. But actually that is literally qualia. So it's that idea that you are, and that's what I guess a lot of the research, I mean, you were talking about how this is happening now. It's Johannes Kleiner at the moment who's leading this with Sean Tull. Sean Tull's from Oxford University, and Johannes Kleiner is from the Munich Center for Mathematical Philosophy. So they're kind of trying to find a way forward, which I find really interesting, because it's kind of building on this integrated information theory idea that exists, that actually consciousness works in ways that you can identify and give value to mathematically. And I love that, because it's kind of because I've always believed that mathematics can you can turn anything into an algorithm. And, so the whole universe is mathematically based. Actually, I mentioned G. Hardy earlier on, and he once said that the only true reality was mathematical reality. And I really kind of think that music, in a way, is kind of finding that mathematical reality in a way that is more intuitive, like a lot of scientists and physicists have actually discussed that in the past.
So Lauren was talking earlier about visualizing what dark matter would look like. And I know you've done some work with SLAC, which we're going to watch the video. Can you just maybe tell us a little bit about that work?
Yeah, I was working with Risa Weschler, who's the director of the Kavli Institute of Astrophysics and Cosmology, and also with Ralph Kahler, who was doing these incredible visualizations. He did one of ionizing gas, and he also did another one of dark matter from the beginning of the universe, from the Big Bang. So, although it's kind of slightly after that, but it's very interesting, because when you get into this, it has a feeling that you are actually. When I was writing the music, I felt like I was looking at the DNA of consciousness in a way, because it's kind of like, we don't really understand what, I mean, dark matter is, it's what keeps galaxies together. It's about the gravity of it. But then you have dark energy, which actually is accelerating the expansion of the universe. And it's kind of, in a way, I kind of find it very interesting, look at the visualization that Ralph Kahler did, because for me, it's kind of, it was like having a collaboration with someone who had a visualization of the nature of consciousness. And it kind of felt like that, but obviously that's not a scientific perspective. So that's a visualization of dark matter itself. We're looking at the entire expansion of the universe. So it's from the beginning, 13.7 billion years ago, to now. We're kind of, it's a visualization of that time, kind of pushed down, compressed into 5 minutes or whatever the original was. But it's kind of, I really love it, because also you have these galaxies that appear. So the big glowing lights are kind of galaxies that appear. And again, dark matter is what keeps the galaxies together. Otherwise they'd fly apart. So it's that kind of, I suppose it's that notion, but yeah, it's very beautiful. I mean, it was originally in 3D, and it's a fantastic thing. I was blown away when I saw it at the Stanford Linear Accelerator when they showed me around. It was incredible.
Nitin, you've been absolutely amazing, and I feel like we're cutting this conversation short, but we'll have to wait to the next time we go on tour together. We need another. Cool. We need another trip to Australia. So we've got a whole.
Yeah, absolutely. Hope that happens soon. Well.
But until then, thank you so much for joining me. Thanks.
All right.
My final guest for this hour of Between Worlds, Exploring Space and Sound, is someone who's become one of my best friends, even though we haven't really spent that much time in physical contact with each other. Her name is Salena Godden. She's an amazing poet, activist, broadcaster, essayist, and there she is, Salena. This is like the second time we've almost met together.
I know, it's amazing. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's so lovely to see you, even though it's just through my screen. Hello.
I first heard and saw Salena recite her poem, Pessimism is for Lightweights. I think we were talking about 2 years ago now, 2018, when your book came out, and I just remember thinking, I need to work with this woman.
This road is made of protest, and those not permitted to vote, and those that are still fighting to speak with a boot stamping on their throat. Pessimism is for lightweights. There is a power and strength in optimism. To have faith and stay true to you. Because if you can look in the mirror and have belief and promise, you will share wonder in living things. Beauty, books, dreams, art. Love your neighbour and be kind. And have an open heart. Then you're already winning at living. You speak up. You show up. You stand tall. It's silence that is complicit. It's apathy that's hurting us all.
Since those last 2 years, what have you been doing? Because you've got a new EP out just now, haven't you?
Yeah. The main thing that I've been working on is the new novel, and that's out in January. That's Mrs. Death, Mrs. Death. So I got a deal with Canongate for that. So I'm really excited about that. So that's kind of a little departure from poetry for me. So that's a fiction book, real booky book. But during lockdown, I made an EP just to try and help a little bit. It's 5 poems. If you can imagine, I wanted it to feel like having a little poetry gig in your headphones. So it's just 5 poems. 3 are recordings of one of the last lovely gig I did, and 2 of them are pieces that I wrote during lockdown and recorded here at home in my room here.
Because you say you're fascinated, when we've chatted, you're fascinated by space, by nature, by the feeling of connectivity. But at the same time, your poems are really grounded in social, political awareness, activism. How do those 2 worlds meet for you? And how do you kind of consciously or subconsciously structure the writing process to balance those two kind of quite different worlds together?
That's quite a lot of questions in one question.
Yeah.
How do I answer this? I kind of feel, okay, so I can come in like this. So I kind of feel that it's my duty or my job. I wouldn't be a Salena if I didn't write how I feel and what's true to me. And as things escalate or as things are scary or dark, then I will write about the darkness as much as I try to be as positive as possible, like with Pessimism is for Lightweights and pieces like that I'm known for. I think I'm really moved by the ordinary, by ordinary kindness, by friendliness, by jokes, and how just these little shadows, the shadows the things that are underneath those little tiny moments of beauty, and I really look out for that, the ordinary, those beautiful moments in my poetry. But I think nature plays a big part in the sense that I'm so easily led. I'm so suggestible. If it's rainy, then I'll write a very rainy, inside-y kind of piece of writing. And if it's a beautiful sunny day, as it is today, but we're all locked indoors, then I'll write about that. I think I'm sort of led by the nose very much. I'm very suggestible. I'm an absolute dream for adverts. For example, we'll be driving and there'll be an advert for ice cream. 5 minutes later, I'll announce, I fancy ice cream. Just because I've seen an advert, I'm so kind of like that. So I'm kind of led by my feelings very much. And I think the moon, I'm very emotional. And I think the moon, I really feel like my mood changes with the moon and with the tides and with the weather and with the seasons. I'm just like a kind of kind of person,
the moon is really, because the moon recurs quite a lot in your poetry, when even not just in the Pink Moon or the poem that we're going to talk about in a bit. What is it about the moon that you feel so connected to?
I find it really hypnotic and I stare at it for hours as a kid and even now as an adult. Okay, my name's Salena and that's like the goddess of the moon, Selene. And I'm Cancerian and my planet is the moon. And I just have always been fascinated by it, the way that the tides and the way the water and months and cycles and just all of that stuff, and making little wishes to the moon I used to do as a kid. I still do now. I just feel that it's powerful. I feel like it whispers to me. But when you're all locked up indoors, you kind of can't hear the message. That's kind of where that poem came from.
So when we started working together remotely, I think you'd already kind of been drafting the poem "The Mood Don't Talk to Me Anymore." Can you tell me a bit about the process and where that came from, how you started writing that?
Oh, now that poem began at the very beginning of lockdown, kind of, or near the right the beginning of March, when it was very terrifying. I mean, it still is terrifying, don't get me wrong, but I think when it was all very stark and raining constantly, and I was just, a lot of the things that are mentioned in the poem are around my house. So I've got plastic flowers that I bought, plastic blossom that I got from downtown Chinatown, and there's a skeleton hanging in my tree which I put bird feed in to try and get birds to feed from the skeleton. It's just a little project of mine, but they do, and it's just so beautiful seeing this skeleton covered in starlings and sparrows. And I
actually thought you were coming up with really sophisticated metaphors. Actually, you were walking around your house picking up objects. But then they hold a meaning which is so much greater than the sum of their parts. But just with collaboration, like how was that? Not necessarily working with me, but also when you're a writer and you're kind of in your own world. What is that like to hand over your sort of baby? And it was the first few drafts to someone else to kind of get their angle on it. What was that like for you?
I really like the process. I like poems having other lives than just living in a book or just living in a gig. Or I've worked with music quite a lot over the years. It started in the late 90s working with Cold Cut, and then working with Peter Coy, I even did a track with Alabama 3 once. I've liked working with musicians. Sometimes when I'm writing, it comes out as little songs. I'm not like the greatest singer, and I can't play any instruments. When I'm very drunk, I think I can play guitar, but that's just something between me and, you know, me in the dark and a bottle of something. But yeah, so I think music is a really way to get my words across and sort of push the feeling through, because so much is said in the pause, so much is said in the breath before the next statement, and music can really help you with that. Yeah, anyway, I can't wait to work on something new with you. I've got something brewing.
When you create, so when you pull something out of the ether and you structure it in a certain way into an entity that someone else can understand, so like the way you did with my emotions, or you do with words, you put them together in a way that then has an emotional connection and resonance. Do you think about that process as well, like what your role is as the poet and the person putting those words to paper?
I don't think I pull it out of the ether. I think I definitely pull it out of myself. It's not, you know, it's really, that's what's so difficult. That's why sometimes poems take ages, because your first knee-jerk reaction is the emotional response, and that would literally just be a string of expletives and screaming, and but no one wants to hear that. So then you've just got to kind of like a red wine jus. You just kind of simmer it down until it makes any kind of sense to another human being, other than sort of constant screaming, which is kind of what I feel like writing at the moment, just pages of screaming. So you kind of, you know, marinate that, kind of, yeah, bring that down, simmer it down until you get something that makes the nugget of something that makes sense, like just a magic bean. You've just simmered it right down until you've just got the most perfect little thing of what you were trying to say, without, you know, swearing, and sounding too, I don't know, too much or not enough. I don't know.
Pessimism is for lightweight. Pessimism is for lightweight. Beautiful.
You know, we're all under the moon, but we're not all, you know, going through the same horrors. We're not all equally protected. We're not equally safe. And I'm really worrying about that every day. I'm so worried about everything every day. And if we can just kind of bear that in mind and just sort of really dig deep, to sort of, you know, help each other as much as we can. It's a really, really horrendous time right now.
This is And the Moon Don't Talk to Me Anymore.
And the moon don't talk to me anymore. And starlings swing on the skeleton in a cage, pecking at the fat and the meat and the seed. And through my dirty window the cherry blossom was always plastic, bought from a fiver from downtown Chinatown. And the moon don't talk to us anymore, and my white tablecloth is stained with coffee which came from a country already in flame. And the moon don't talk to us anymore. She is rising fat and full and furious with grief, a morning that washes up with tide after tide, and the tide that rises with the moon, the salt water crashing to the shore. And the moon won't talk to me anymore, and the moon won't talk to me anymore, and the night is dead, and the dark is long, and the rain pours down like the sky's all a river. And the moon don't sing, and the moon won't sing, and the moon don't sing, and the fear spreads and seeps into everything. It's like a bad smell, it's like smoke under your door. And the moon don't talk to you anymore. You have memories of sleeping in your clothes like a bad dog on a blanket on the floor. Are these memories or premonition? You know, you just don't know anymore, because the moon won't talk talk to you anymore. And the moon hangs heavy, and the sun has turned his back, and all I see is his coat of clouds, and the rain washes decency away. But the sound of the washing machine is a comfort. It's like the sound of the sea from what you remember, from a postcard someone sent you from before. Remember? It was stuck on your fridge door. It said, "I wish you were here." And I do. I wish you were here. 'Cause the moon won't talk to us anymore. Because the moon won't talk to me anymore. And the fridge feels safe, so we stock up the store. You hope the delivery man washed his hands, cleaned his van, sanitized his face, and has no next of kin. And we buzz on the internet like bees. Oh, we are the lucky ones, aren't we? Hiding at home, locked in our houses, wearing pajamas, boosting the heating. Try not to think of the poor or the elderly, those that ain't safe and those that aren't eating. Think of the food banks, the people in cages, all ages, the kids that needed that one hot school meal. It's got real. All the folk who can't afford bills, unpaid time off work, medicine, pills, and the moon ain't shining anymore. Her milky face seems clotted with uncertainty, and the gods are all stone cold silent today, and the blue sky is a box set you binge in a heat wave. Hope is at the bottom of a well. There's a hole in my bucket, but I keep turning the handle. Because this too will pass. And nothing is forever. And all pigs are equal. But some pigs are more equal than others, speeding off in private jets to bunkers, leaving their brothers. When they voted in this mess, it's flawed, and the moon won't talk to them anymore. Well, the moon won't talk to them anymore. And well, we all didn't picture it this way. You hum along to the fridge. You talk to the washing machine because its face is round like the moon. And you stand there clapping at a feeling. There are scratch marks on the back of the door and the ceiling. 'Cause the moon don't talk to me anymore. 'Cause the moon don't talk to me anymore.
Thank you so much to Anna and to Salena, the final guest, in an hour that has been utterly extraordinary and transcendent. And actually, to quote Salena, has been an hour of magic beans. This from the York Festival of Ideas. All of us were going to work together in York Minster at the opening of this year's Festival of Ideas. Clearly, the pandemic has shot that idea. But we very much hope that we will be all together in physical form next year's opening night of the festival. But in the meantime, I just wanted to say thank you and to reflect on some of the things that we've heard. The Festival of Ideas was set up by the university as a means of reaching diverse audiences. And two key elements of that were to demonstrate not only the importance of science in terms of discovery, but also to reflect and to demonstrate the vital importance of the arts to all of our lives in terms of society. And I think there has never been a more important time for exploring the interfaces between science and art, from Cosmic Vertigo, as we heard earlier, right through to material science, and now the kind of sheer power of, as Salena said, the way in which the tiny moments of beauty become magnified in this really horrible time that we're living through. So I want to thank all of the speakers today, thank them hugely for giving their time for free to the York Festival of Ideas. I hope very much that this prefaces the opportunity for us to work together for next year, and for all of us to stay safe and well so that we can do just that in the 2021 York Festival of Ideas. So thank you very much to everybody who's contributed so fantastically to our final day of the festival. Thank you.
Wow.